Alright guys, welcome back to F1 News. There are 4 races left in the Formula 1 season, and will we get another different winner from now until the race in Abu Dhabi? Lewis Hamilton, despite his disqualification at the US Grand Prix, very confident in the upgrades Mercedes have brought to their car, not only getting time in performance, but also in terms of confidence, is moving Hamilton in the right direction. Are Mercedes setting up for their trademark victory in Brazil in a few weeks' time? Very much intrigued to your thoughts in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always, I greatly appreciate it. Loads of updates today. Firstly, this is quite a big one from Sauber, what is currently Alfa Romeo Sauber, won't be for too much longer. Interested in signing Nico Hülkenberg. This might make a fair bit of sense, to be fair, given the partnership with Audi that is ongoing at the moment. So yeah, apparently they're looking at Hülkenberg. It kind of makes sense, right? He's been good for Haas since he's come back into the sport. I was definitely, I wasn't convinced that it was a great idea to bring Hulk back in place of Mick Schumacher, but I think despite the fact that the Haas isn't very good, it has proven to be a good decision, and therefore Sauber are interested in getting Hülkenberg to their team. What does that mean for Haas? I guess we'll see over time. But, well, their car needs to be better if they want to try keep Hülkenberg around, or he will, I'm sure, go if he gets the opportunity to the Sauber Audi project, which, of course, could have some good upside potential. Andretti, lots of drama with them. You guys full well know Andretti General Motors partnership confirmed by the Formula 1 governing body, the FIA, to be a legal, allowed entity to come into the sport. Now, Formula 1 themselves have to agree to that. They don't want to. You guys know how it goes. It's almost like we're in a franchise ecosystem at the moment where the teams pretty much own these spots that are worth a lot of money. They don't want anyone else to come in because it's going to dilute the value of their share of the revenues, but also potentially dilute the value somewhat of their spot, at least in terms of how much their company is worth into the sport. For various reasons, people don't want Andretti. Some teams are supporting them. McLaren and Aston Martin apparently are the two, but Formula 1 themselves, this is an interesting rumour that's been emerging, has said to General Motors, hey, we're happy for you to join the grid, but we don't want you partnering with Andretti. We want you to partner with some other brand around the space. Now, I don't really know if this is true, and if this is true, then Formula 1 management is taking the heat that they rightly deserve for this, because I just don't get this philosophy. General Motors, you can talk about the problems they might have anyway, but Andretti, for them, it seems like one of the perfect partners to have from the racing sense. They don't have all this other baggage from other, previous motorsport experience in F1, for example. Okay, Michael Andretti, F1 driver Mario Andretti, of course, but, the team itself isn't doesn't have all that extra stuff that comes along with it, and honestly, they have great racing pedigree elsewhere, so it just makes sense for their parties, and I don't really know why F1 would be keen to, have General Motors partner with somebody else other than Andretti, but I'm sure they have their reasons, and it probably involves money at the end of the day, and this is what the FIA president has mentioned, Mohammed Ben Sulayem, who has been very much on board with getting a new team, and you've got to understand, he's got his bias as well. The F1 governing body, the FIA, if they get a new team in, they get more, money gets paid by those teams, etc. I'm pretty sure they get more money from those teams and stuff like that. So, it's beneficial for him if there was another team on the grid. But, he's actually called them out and said it's all about the money, and came up with like a whole speech on this stuff. And you can, argue the merits of this individual and exactly whether what he's saying is because because it's in the best interest of the sport. But on this one, I think that it probably is. So we'll see how that develops going forwards. But a big story. This is another one for Ferrari. Supposedly, their engines have run out of juice, and their engines are about to collapse, and they need a new one, and will probably take grid penalties at one of the upcoming Grand Prix. This season, earlier on, we were allowed, or the teams were allowed, to go from 3 power unit ICEs up to 4. That was the allocation this year, just because more races, more sprints. They decided, let's allow 4 instead of 3. Often, though, the teams will always take 1 penalty, just because okay, you've got 4 engines, but if you use them to their limit, you're probably going to gain more performance over those races where you use them to the limit than you would lose by taking a grid penalty elsewhere. So, if you allow 3, most teams will probably use 4. If you allow 4, most teams will probably use 5. But maybe not. We haven't really seen too many penalties elsewhere because of stuff like this. But Ferrari will probably take one going forwards because their engines have run out of gas. So, maybe that's going to be in Mexico. Maybe that's going to be in Brazil, but we'll see. It could be Vegas as well, potentially, just because, you know, there's a big straight in Vegas and possibly decent chances to overtake. Quickly on Red Bull as well, Christian Horner has actually said, now again, Christian Horner says things all the time, whether it's true or not is, a matter for debate, but he says that Yuki Tsunoda wouldn't be an AlphaTauri if he wasn't a contender to join Red Bull. Now, of course, he's a contender to join Red Bull, but I just don't know if Horner sees Tsunoda as the man, and there were rumours recently that actually Horner wanted Tsunoda gone, but it was Helmut Marko that said, well, we want to keep that relationship good with Honda, so let's keep him around, and therefore, apparently there was a bit of friction over that conversation, but Honda's now saying, no, Tsunoda's our man, and definitely it could be a potential springboard if he does well next year, but fact of the matter is, Tsunoda's going to have like 4 years at AlphaTauri. If he was going to go to the Red Bull seat, he probably would have done by now. And let's be honest, despite the fact that Tsunoda's done better than Daniel Ricciardo over the races they've been together, Ricciardo's going to get the seat in the Red Bull car if and when Perez is gone. Also, quickly on Isaac Hadjar, because as we mentioned, Tsunoda with all this positivity from Horner, but he's the one that gets ousted from the seat in Mexico, at least in FP1, for Isaac Hadjar to run in Mexico in the free practice 1 session. Now let's talk about Mercedes and also Ferrari to some extent, but this weekend Mercedes were a big talking point because they brought an upgrade, right? And this was meant to be a pretty big one. They said that in terms of lap time, it wasn't massively significant, but as I said to you guys, if it increases the confidence of the drivers, I'm not necessarily sure it did to Russell necessarily, just because he was talking about this interesting middle stint on the hards where he was like a second a lap off the pace for some reason, but on the mediums he was all of a sudden once again pretty much the fastest guy on track, up there with Hamilton at the front of the field. So that was the confusing part for Russell, and maybe he hasn't quite got the confidence in these upgrades yet that Hamilton has, but yeah, it seems like it's a performance gain, but it's also allowing Hamilton to throw the car around a bit more confidence in it in qualifying, and also certainly in race conditions that we saw towards the end of the Grand Prix. Hamilton, I'm sure in hindsight, is probably kind of happy that he didn't win the race, because he would have been way more frustrated having got disqualified from the win rather than getting disqualified from P2, but still, the disqualification was a big deal. We don't really know how much time running the car lower to the ground than it was that it should have been, because the plank wear feature was gaining them. It probably would have been relatively marginal, especially because the rumour has it that we're talking tenths of a millimetre that these planks were wearing more than was allocated to be allowed. So, the performance gain wouldn't have been crazy. It was really the strategy that it was costing Mercedes this time around. And of course, this was an upgrade they've talked about for some time, a new floor change. I think the differences between what we're seeing this year with Mercedes and what we were seeing last year with Mercedes is that this floor is targeted for next year's car and a completely different changing concept. It's obviously beneficial to this car as well, but nonetheless, James Allison has made it very clear next year's car will be a Red Bull-esque design. Last year, they brought an upgrade to Austin, a new floor in Austin, same as this year they've done, and they did well. Hamilton got P2 last year as provisionally, he got P2 this year, and he was closer this year to P2 than he was last year. Okay, maybe Verstappen didn't have the same brake issues last year than he did this year, but it was kind of similar. There were definitely a lot of parallels in the two races that we saw last year and this year at the Circuit of the Americas, but they put that upgrade on the car. They then won in Brazil, and Mercedes thought, damn, we're back, the zero pods are working, let's keep with this concept. They turn up to Bahrain and they realise, hang on a second, this car concept does have nowhere near the ceiling that the Red Bull deep undercut side pod design has, and it ain't going to work, but we've run out of money to change the concept. So that was a big wake-up call at the first race of the season, and Red Bull have streaked away, understandably so, since then. Hamilton did say, though, the upgrade they brought to the Circuit of the Americas was the first one he's actually felt in the last 2 years, which is quite the statement to say. Surely he must have felt some other ones somewhat, but he reckons this one was quite considerable in terms of performance and feeling of the car, and this is obviously just one change of many that they will bring to the concept going forwards. And Hamilton did say, look, we're going to need not just 1 times this amount, we're going to need 2 or 3 times this level of step if they really want to start challenging with the Red Bull. But yeah, Toto Wolff said that immediately after practice, Hamilton was like, yeah, I feel the rear of the car now, I feel the downforce. The car's more predictable and more confident. And this is the key point. The rear downforce of the car, the rear stability was a massive talking point. And sure, that probably is determined somewhat by the suspension, which they aren't really changing, and the design of the monocoque itself. But of course, the floor has quite a big part to play in that as well. So Hamilton was immediately confident out of the gate, and he even went on to say just yesterday that, and you know, it's like he's listening to the videos, because I'm pretty sure I made this comment like last week sometime. Maybe it was only worth a 10th as an upgrade, for example, but there was at least a 10th in confidence that it gave me. So it's quite interesting what you see when you do have those. It's like a double knock-on effect. Quite an interesting statement from Hamilton, because, and this is what Toto Wolff has said for some time, the car is not great compared to the Red Bull, but it's so unpredictable at like turn and entry especially. You don't really know what's going to happen to the rear of the car. I remember watching the onboards of Hamilton in, I think it was Zandvoort this year, and it just seemed like a nightmare to even get on the power, because you're trying to get the power on, the rear of the car slides away, you know, you're ruining the rear tyres. Not ideal, and Hamilton seems way more confident now with the new upgrade that that's the case. So maybe in terms of raw performance, if you had, you know, a robot driving the car that could perfectly find the limit of the grip everywhere, they would probably see 1/10 of a lap improvement, maybe slightly more, something around that ballpark. But for an actual human in the cockpit, this is a significant step in the right direction. So how well will this work when they arrive into the Mexican Grand Prix? Again, a circuit where they were pretty good last year. They had a chance maybe to win that race if Verstappen's tyres degraded, and I don't know whether he's going to chuck the same set of mediums back on his car again, but yeah, last year was kind of wild that a lot of us thought, you know, Verstappen's going to have to change tyres again here, and maybe Mercedes can make this work as a result, and Verstappen was pumping in 122.5, 122.4, 122.6, 122.3, 122.5 for about like 40, 50 laps in a row, absolutely ridiculous, and you know, they're on the radio to Hamilton be like, yep, we think Max's tyres are going to start falling off sometime soon. That was not the case. You know, we know that the Red Bull characteristics of that suspension and the design of it is definitely very much favourable for incredible tyre wear. Relatively low deck circuit as well is in Mexico, at least as long as you manage tyres somewhat through the S's towards the end of the lap, and Verstappen obviously a bit of a tyre saving wizard in and of himself as of late. So definitely not an easy circuit to win in Mexico, but we know that last year Ferrari were terrible there, mainly because their turbocharger at altitude doesn't seem to work so well. So Ferrari might not be as much of a threat, and well, we don't really know until the weekend begins, but that's just a theory, is based on what happened last year, and I think historically that kind of has been the case. So Mercedes should be in with a shout next time, and they were pretty good there last year, but yeah, beating Red Bull is going to be another story entirely, especially when the data from this past weekend, yes, Hamilton was only 2 seconds behind, and it would have been closer if not for Zhou on the final lap, and okay, didn't matter anyway, maybe the car was illegal, I don't know how much time that gained him, you guys can think about that. But in terms of lap time analysis that Dr. Robs does here, there was still a considerable difference what we saw on the Saturday, right? I mean, Saturday, the first few laps, Hamilton was close to Verstappen. Then he fell back and Verstappen just pulled away into the distance. And I think that probably there was some management from both parties at that point. Like Hamilton knew that he wasn't catching, so he needed to make sure that he was gapping Leclerc, which he was, and needed to ensure, and Verstappen was just trying to ensure that, you know, he didn't destroy his tyres, I guess, and had some life left in the last few laps to really push hard, given Hamilton had taken a lot of life out in the first few laps. So I think there was some discrepancy there. And also in the race itself, Hamilton came out of the pits pushing hard immediately because he had a lot of ground to make up. So by the time he got towards the end of his stint, he probably had less life in his medium tyres than Verstappen did in the sprint on Saturday. But still, Verstappen pulled about 10 seconds in 19 or so laps. He was about half a second up on what Hamilton was doing during the sprint race, and that was with no brake issues. When the brake issues arose, then Verstappen had less pace than Hamilton during the Grand Prix. But Dr. Robs looked into the analysis and compared Verstappen's lap times in, let's say, lap 15 and 16 of his stint during the sprint, and Hamilton's lap times on his 15th and 16th lap during the Grand Prix, and finds that Hamilton was roughly half a second slower. So in the sprint at this point, Verstappen was the fastest man on track. In the race at this point, Hamilton was pretty much the fastest man on track, although Russell was also going fast behind as well, but there was still half a second delta when you no longer include the brake issues. Now, there's other factors, of course, in play here. Track conditions are different on the Sunday, the effect of the winds, it's not exactly a parallel. And I've also got to think that Norris during the Grand Prix on Sunday was getting dropped hard by Hamilton, whereas on the Saturday, Norris was actually pretty much the same pace as Hamilton, and Verstappen was only like half a second ahead of that time. So I think that this analysis isn't necessarily perfect, but I think it is quite clear that the Red Bull is still the fastest car. With no issues, the Red Bull is still faster. How much it's faster, I don't know. And of course, let's be honest, the Red Bull this weekend was set up with a pretty high ride height, which which would gain more performance if it was closer to the ground. So you've got to think that, like, regardless of what Mercedes do to their car from now to the end of the year, the Red Bull is always going to be faster, especially in race trim. And unless Verstappen has issues, it's going to be so hard to stop him. But, last year they messed up their setup in Brazil and Mercedes got a 1-2. So is it trending in a similar direction again? Quite possibly, yes, but I'm intrigued to your thoughts on that one in the comments section below. Just before we close out here, I'm sorry to confirm this news, but it's got to be done that there will be an opening ceremony on the starting grid for the Las Vegas Grand Prix. You guys probably remember the events of Miami. I don't really want to talk about it before the race began. But from 7:30 p.m. on the Wednesday, there's going to be an opening ceremony. So 30,000 people are expected to see all 20 drivers. They've got Cirque du Soleil, they've got Blue Man Group, and they've got 9 legendary musical artists, which are listed as follows. So, I don't know. The razzmatazz continues. F1 is basically a circus at this point, I'm not going to lie. But so if you have to watch and you have to tune in for this, I apologize in advance. But maybe some people will enjoy it, so fair enough. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new. Take care, and I'll see you next time.